Hello everybody, this is Tip Top MTG here today with another MTG video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at all 8 sets that are currently legal in Standard, and I'm going to be kind of ranking them. I did this last year and I believe the year before that, and it's always been such a fun video for me to do. Essentially, I'm going to take all 8 sets, kind of put them in the order that I liked them. So this video is going to be definitely very subjective, but I am going to be using points that I think most people will be able to relate to. I'm not going to be ranking these in terms of power or value or anything. It's going to be kind of a mix. If something was super underpowered and not fun to play, it's going to rank lower. If something was overpowered, it also could rank lower. But if something is the right power level and fun, that's generally what's going to be ranking higher. So it's not necessarily, a scale of power, but instead kind of just overall, was the draft fun, was, all of that. So why don't we jump right into this? So starting off, at the bottom of the list, number 8 is Core Set 2021. This is a core set, and I think that honestly is the perfect explanation for this set. It's not wildly overpowered, it's not underpowered really either, but there aren't any cohesive themes that drew me really into this. Yes, it had the theme of planeswalkers, kind of, where we had the different planeswalkers and, cards that went with them, but there weren't too many memorable designs in my opinion, and it often just leads to me kind of forgetting about the set. If you talk about any other set in Standard right now, I can tell you kind of the major archetypes and themes and things within them, but Core Set 2021 is just kind of there, and honestly, it's not like that's an awful thing. I mean, it is just supposed to be a core set. It just has a couple of those cards you might see around. It doesn't leave a lasting impact. The draft was just mediocre, and it just is almost uninteresting. And because it was one of those sets where I was like, oh wait, that's still in Standard, I felt like it kind of deserved to be at the bottom of the list. Now, I'm not going to talk about it too much in the individual sections, but towards the end of the video, I am going to be comparing this to last year's, and I believe I ranked Core Set 2021 last year as the 3rd best set. Now, remember, last year I made the video immediately after Core Set 2021 came out, but it is still an interesting perspective to see how far this has fallen. But just generally uninteresting, unmemorable, and just not that big of an impact leads this to be ranked at number 8. And oh, how the mighty have fallen. At number 7, I have Throne of Eldraine. Last year, this was my pick for the number 1 best set in Standard. At the time, I acknowledged that it was overpowered, but I still felt like it had a ton of cool designs. But looking back at it, I don't know why I praised it so highly. I mean, yes, there are some interesting designs, and maybe it's just the fact that I've gotten sick of seeing the same cards over and over again because they're so powerful they're not being replaced. But the mechanics, things like adamant and food, were uninteresting. The themes were okay, and there were cards that had interesting designs, but the set cohesively, while it was interesting from a lore perspective, just really didn't do anything for me. And at the time, when I first did this list, I can even go back and check my notes on it. I said it was super powerful and that I enjoyed that and that it had a nice limited environment, which is true, and that adventures were cool. But at this point, I'm tired of adventures. I don't do that limited anymore, and the overpoweredness of it has kind of overrun the rest of Standard. And so this is one of those ones where it probably doesn't deserve to be this low on the list, but I have gotten so sick of those cards that you see in every game. If you're running red, they probably have Bone Crusher Giant. It has gotten to be kind of a problem. And so it kind of wears out the things that were fun designs because you just see them so often. So it almost feels unfun and uninteresting compared to something where you only see it occasionally, and that is really fun and really interesting. So, I've probably put examples up on the screen at this point of cards that I'm sick of seeing that I thought had cool, interesting designs, but just looking back on it, there's not too much that I'm sad about losing when rotation happens. And I think that's the sign of a kind of burnt out set. I mean, it is the oldest set in the Standard. It is the one that has been around the longest. And so I think it just makes sense. I will not be upset to see this set go. So unlike the last two where they fell drastically in placement, this set actually rose from last year, and that's Theros Beyond Death. It actually has risen because I've re-seen a lot of the cards from the set, and individually they're still really, really interesting to me. At the time, I hated the monocolor theme and thought that it was just a very boring set in general. But I think almost my hatred of Throne of Eldraine has increased my love of Theros. I don't know how to describe it. It's something about there's these, like, not simple designs, but designs that aren't necessarily the most broken thing in the world outside of a few, like Uro. And I felt like, especially with Uro being banned and like everything at this point, it means that the cards that I do see from Theros often are fun, interesting build around instead of cards that I get bored of seeing. And I think, the banning of Uro has actually risen this set up, meaning if that set was printed without it and even the other Titan Croxa, I think it would have been a better set. And I don't think the mono theme colors or the mono-colored theme is the best, but it still allows for really interesting building directions. And so you often end up with lots of cards that are really fun to build around and may not be the best, but sometimes are. There's not, they don't have to be bad. It's not that I only like bad cards. I just feel like with the other two sets dropping down, it's made me appreciate Theros a lot more. I think the set is a little bit boring, and that's why it does place so low, but I do think there are those few cards that raise the set up, and unlike Throne of Eldraine, where, I've just gotten sick of everything, I feel like Theros is actually a little bit underplayed, which means when I see the cards, they still almost feel new for being a set that was released so long ago in terms of standard, and so I feel like that just means I'm going to be a little sad when it rotates just because it means we are going to see less of those cards. The mechanics of the set were still interesting. I think Escape was really cool. I think that we saw some interesting stuff. The Enchantments Matters was a nice, like, simple theme where it's like, yeah, just play enchantments. And I just felt like everything kind of worked together. So yeah, I think Theros really, really decent. And that's kind of how I would describe it. The other two I would say are uninteresting. I would say Theros is decent. So yeah, that is Theros at number 6. Next, we have a more recent addition to Magic. If you'll notice, these past 3 have all been older sets, and this one's actually the latest set, Dungeons & Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, coming in at number 5. In my opinion, the set was interesting, and honestly, when I was trying to do this list, I was trying to say as objective as possible. It's the newest set, meaning I should probably be the most hyped for it because the cards feel the newest, the freshest, I've seen them the least, and all of that. But I feel like the set had a couple of issues, and I think a lot of that comes down to the mechanics of it and just some other glaring issues. So let's first talk about mechanics for the set. In my opinion, rolling dice was just not that great. There are cards in Magic where you flip coins, and that's very, very similar to a lot of the dice rolling cards, but they were never in high quantity. However, with D&D, it feels more like if you're running a dice rolling card, it's gonna be weak most of the time. So if you're running one, you better be running cards that let you roll multiple dice. In my opinion, it just felt too random. It was like, you're not gonna draw this in every game, and if you do, it may not even work. And at that point, you're just making too many compromises. And yes, it's really fun when your Delina deck that duplicates lots of things gets to pop off. But it's really unfun when you cast a spell that's supposed to do something and it just doesn't do what you need. And I feel like it was just a little bit too random. Like, if they would have had a couple dice rolling cards, I think that would have been fine. Similar to how we get a few coin flipping cards. But I think that the mass amount of them just leads to unfun gameplay. Dungeons as well, I feel like were a really interesting concept and I was really excited about them. But the power level was so low, in my opinion, that it's not fun. Mechanics don't have to be powerful to be fun. A Mass from War of the Spark was really fun in my opinion, but it wasn't a powerful mechanic. However, in my opinion, dungeons are so weak that they are unfun. I mean, there are very few ways to do it at instant speed. I don't know if there are actually any in Standard. I know there are a couple in Commander because of the Commander deck, but as what we got in Standard, and as part of the main set, most of it is sorcery speed, requiring you to be able to attack, which means you're probably already winning if you can safely attack, or requiring copious amounts of mana. So I just feel like, what you're getting doesn't feel satisfying. If you're not going through the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, the rest of them don't have satisfying endings for the amount of work and mana you're putting in. And even then, the Mad Mage is just so unrealistic to get the end of that it just loses some of its fun. Because you're like, I did all this work, yay, I finished this dungeon, and you just don't get enough out of it. Now, I don't want this to become a set review of Forgotten Realms, but just know, in my opinion, the mechanics were kind of boring. The only one that really spoke to me was classes, so it's already not doing great at a mechanical level. However, I just don't feel like a lot of the set worked. It's like they focused so much on flavor that, I don't know, the card designs just didn't feel like they flowed really well together, and I just didn't love the way the set was designed. There weren't too many interesting designs. Like, I was trying to do Brawl, my Brawl week, where I choose 5 interesting legendaries, and it was difficult. Some of them weren't that interesting, and I just feel like the set, and this could be due to MTG burnout. You know, we had Strix Haven into Modern Horizons 2 into Forgotten Realms almost just continuously, but it just felt like I wasn't super interested in a lot of the cards. I have not built a new standard deck since Forgotten Realms has come out, and I think that's just a sign of the set not being that interesting. However, I am going to say it's more interesting than Theros, and it is not as, like, it's not sickening, but as uninteresting as Core Set 2021 and Throne of Eldraine. I'm not trying to say this is a bad set by any stretch of the imagination. It just doesn't have that kind of wow factor that some of the other sets really have for me. You know, I feel like I praised Theros a lot, and then the next one, which I ranked higher than it, I kind of talked down on, but that's just because I feel like we're still in the mediocre set territory, in my opinion. We're about to kind of jump up to good sets, but at this point, I just wanted to mention a couple of my issues with the set. Overall, you know, it's fine. Couple interesting cards. I don't want to say that it is a bad set, but it's just not my favorite. But as we move up the ladder, we have Zendikar Rising coming in at number 4. So this is a refreshing, almost basic set. Yes, Party wasn't my favorite thing in the world, but I feel like the rest of the set was done really, really well. I was really worried going into the set that it was going to be an issue because landfall was kind of running rampant, and at the beginning with the release of 4-color Omnath, that definitely was a problem. But getting rid of Omnath from that, it was not super innovative, but it felt like fun magic. Cards that just worked well together, the set kind of came together cohesively in a way that was super interesting, yet not super overpowered, excluding 4-color Omnath. And because of that, I feel like I was able to really enjoy the set. It also came with rotation, meaning that a lot of the cards got to see play because of the more powerful staples of the format rotated out, so that probably has some impact on my opinion. I think Party was, you know, obviously boring, but I think the rest of the set was done beautifully in a way where it, you know, it just really showed off Magic at its, like, purest, not complicated form. Now, I like complex cards, and that's part of what puts some of these other sets ahead of it. But I think that this is kind of where we're starting to get into really good sets where it is Magic, and the reason I play Magic is for the fun creatures, fun mechanics, and way things work together, and Zendikar kind of had all of that for me. And I know that was a quick explanation of Zendikar compared to Forgotten Realms, but I feel like that's kind of the point of Zendikar, is that it is simple. It's just good stuff. It's nothing that's you're gonna go wow about, but there's also nothing that is super awful about it. And yeah, so the next one brings us to the cold plane of Kalbheim. In my opinion, you know, at number 3, Kalbheim, there was nothing really broken about the set. It introduced some really interesting mechanics into things like MTG Arena, which didn't have things like snow or shapeshifters with changeling. All these things that aren't necessarily new to the game, but are new to the modern kind of format of Standard, and I think introducing them into Arena was really awesome for both Standard and specifically Historic, which unlocked a ton of new stuff. And so I felt like it wasn't broken, but there were interesting designs that enhance specific decks, and that is the kind of perfect, you know, set for me. There wasn't too much in terms of lore that super interested me, but I feel like the set was done where the power level and the interestingness of it kind of matched up at a perfect level, and that's why it's here. Nothing crazy complex, but still, Snow, multiple double face cards, and Changelings were all amazing mechanics for me. You know, the only thing I felt like I missed out on was the fact that the set was only one set. I feel like Kaldheim was one of those ones where it had enough detail with the 10 realms that you could have very easily made that 2 sets. And then maybe we would have been able to explore it a little bit more and have some more of those interesting themes. But outside of that, I mean, I felt like the set was cram-packed, full of really, really fun stuff that wasn't broken and helped fit niche archetypes. The issue was, of course, that Throne of Eldraine was still in the format, and we didn't really get to experience it much. So I'm excited for with the release of Innistrad, Midnight Hunt, that those cards will get to see a little more play. All right, number 2 is Ikkoria, Lair of Behemoths. So this one is a little bit different. I mean, the three out of the 4 sets rotating out were at the bottom of my list, but Ikkoria is up here at the top. You know, It was a more powerful set. It was closer to Throne of Eldraine in power level than something like Forgotten Realms, but I still felt like it was more interestingly powerful. It wasn't just that the card was powerful on paper. Companion, really broken, but also super complex, super fun, and completely played differently than most other cards. It wasn't just that the cards had good stats, it was that the mechanics were really complicated and you could do a lot with them. And for me, that's what I really enjoyed. I loved that Mutate brought with it so many questions. And yes, at the time, I was really wary about new players and understanding the mechanic, but I think with the introduction of MTG Arena, it makes it super easy to understand while still being complex and allowing for a lot of really interesting ways to use it. It's a set full of mechanics that can be used in so many ways. Escape, kind of just on random cards like in Theros. Party, you kind of have to build a party deck, but with, companions, each companion is played differently, and it actually is like a mechanic for deck building instead of a mechanic for in the game. And so I felt like it was just so unique, so creative that I, overlooked some of its flaws. I don't love the Godzilla cards. Some of the cards are a little bit on the broken side, but it played in lots of new spaces that unlocked new ways to play the game. And yes, it was powerful, but it was powerful in an interestingly complex way. So I feel like it just was a perfect combination of stuff. It was broken, but it was not uninterestingly broken. And actually, after the errata of companions, you look back and it's like, oh, there's not anything or not too much that seems that crazy. And finally, at number 1, if you haven't figured it out already, it is Strix Haven School of Mages. This set, I think, was really, really fun. I was worried going into it that the Spells Matters theme of it would limit it to being, only good blue and red cards because there wasn't enough support for those style of cards outside of those colors. But in my opinion, while it wasn't the most impactful set and isn't as powerful as something like Ikkoria, I think that works in its advantage. It just has lots of interesting cards. The mechanics are simple, but still interesting. Magecraft is an ability word, which typically I don't like, but I did love the use of it, including copying spells. It led to some interesting, things that could be done. And I think the one thing that pushes this over the top, if it did not have this thing I'm about to talk about, it would probably be number 3 or 4, was Mystical Archive. I think that was amazing. First off, the cards look great, but ignoring that, it was a great way to get reprints of very powerful and popular instants and sorceries, and it was also a great way to implement it onto MTG Arena. Now, we're going to kind of ignore the economy of it, because I know a lot of people were upset with the rarity of it and all of that. It is the most fun set to open on Arena. You can get 2 rares, you can get 2 mythics, you can get a mythic and a rare. It feels really good to open. And for someone who's not trying to collect every card like 99% of MTG Arena players, it is just an added bonus to the set. It is something that when you open it, you could get extra stuff, and that feels really fun. But it also was almost like Jumpstart 2 for Historic. It introduced a whole new set of cards that weren't ever passed through Standard like most entries into Historic, and kind of boosted up that power level, adding cards like Brainstorm, Mizzix's Mastery, all of those really interesting ones that then are now helping now that Historic Brawl is a major part. So I feel like the main set was really interesting, and then that Mystical Archive pushed it up above the rest of the sets by allowing multiple audiences to enjoy those cards and it to add more than ever to MTG Arena at the same time. But it just allowed for so many new things with the release of Strixhaven. It's one of the few sets I bought the pre-order for because I was so hyped about the Mystical Archives. So in my opinion, Strixhaven is the best set released in the past 2 years, or the 8 sets in Standard, just for those reasons. But that's just my list. I want to know your guys' in the comments down below. How would you rank the current sets in Standard? You can rank it by power level if you want, or just how you liked the set in general. I want to know all that in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, it's a little bit, returning to some of the style of some of my older videos. Hit that like button to let me know if you want to see more content like this, and subscribe to see my other Magic content, and news coverage. We are getting a lot of information about upcoming Magic sets here soon. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.